I want to add a few words about Cindy's sustained and essential contributions to biography and the Center for Biographical Research, because those are the sponsors for today's event, and I know something about what Cindy has meant to both. In 2004, 19 years ago now, Cindy co-edited with Laura Lyons a special issue of Biography entitled Personal Effects, the Testimonial Uses of Life Writing. Its contents, including their introduction and interviews with Gayatri Chakraborty Spivak and Haunani K. Trask, it's still consulted and quoted regularly. Our greatly missed colleague Miriam Fuchs and I asked Cindy to become a co-editor of the journal in 2007, 16 years ago. And she and Miriam became responsible for acquisitions, which means reviewing, commissioning other specialist readers if necessary, and accepting, rejecting, or requiring often extensive revisions for any essay submitted to the journal. Miriam and Cindy also co-edited Life Writing and Translations, a 2009 special issue that emerged from the 2008 International Autobiography Association convention held here in Honolulu, with John Zern, who became co-editor upon Miriam's retirement in 2012, and most recently with Ayu Saraswati, who has joined us as co-editor. Cindy continues to be responsible for what is in biography, 4 times a year, every year. Oh wait, there's more. Almost from the moment she joined, Cindy was suggesting and then ushering into existence a range of clusters and special issues that have profoundly expanded the range and focus of the journal and the field of life writing. She was the principal liaison for Performing Queer Lives, edited by Francesca Royster in 2011. She'll be presenting her work here in the islands later this semester. The next year, Cindy made possible Life Stories from the Creole City. She was heavily involved in our 2013 special issue on baleful post-coloniality, and the cluster on Malcolm X that same year. She is probably best known editorially for Life in Occupied Palestine, which she co-edited with Morgan Cooper and Ibrahim Ali, who is here today, and which has been hugely significant and controversial as a collection that put Palestine voices and lives in the foreground. She was the primary liaison for Caste and Life Narratives in 2017, edited by S. Shankar and Charu Gupta. That special issue went on to become an independently published book in India. She was largely responsible for the special cluster on Prince in 2018, and skillfully organized and worked with special issue editors for M4BL and The Critical Matter of Black Lives, Brittany Cooper and Trevor B. Lindsay that same year. Biographic Mediation, edited by Ebony Coleto, appeared in 2019. Cindy was the driving force bringing that issue into beginning at our end. She was also the lead biography editor on a cluster on academic freedom, academic lives, also in 2019, and essential to the creation of We Are Mauna Kea, Aloha Aina narratives of protest, protection, and place. That, of course, has some resonance with her book. So I just wanted to say that in addition to everything else Cindy does, and many of you are very aware of what that is, her involvement with biography in the Center for Biographical Research has had an immense impact on the field of life writing. And it has certainly been essential for the journal's success, continued relevance, and survival. And Cindy, mahalo for that. And now it gives me great pleasure to turn things over to Monisha Gupta, who will introduce our today's speaker, author, and honoree.
Thank you, friends, for joining us at noontime to celebrate Cynthia Franklin's new and amazing book, Narrating Humanity, Life Writing and Movement Politics from Palestine to Mauna Kea. Thanks to the Center for Biographical Research and the English department for making this event happen, and especially to Shankar for making available these snacks. Please help yourself. And once we are done with the formal part of the event, there is cake and I can smell it. So it's delicious, and the book cover of the cake is absolutely striking. It gives me so much joy to be holding this book that I have seen take shape, not only as ideas that blossomed on the page, but also through Cindy's participation as an activist in multiple movements locally in the US and internationally. This book is amazing because it brings laser-sharp clarity to the stakes to communities organizing for justice in the face of climate change, as foreshadowed by Hurricane Katrina, for the end to police brutality and for Black lives, for Palestinian liberation, and for native Hawaiian sovereignty. The dehumanization and monumental suffering that cascades in our contemporary times are often obvious to us and because they stare us in the face. Perhaps we have become a lot better at apprehending dehumanization. We struggle, however, with acts of humanization without taking recourse to the available liberal tropes of the human rooted in Enlightenment, and therefore contingent on a series of disavowals. So do we give up on the category of human? If not, how do we imagine representations outside of those habits that reach towards something universal? Cindy's book is brilliant because it considers these urgent questions. Each part of the book offers us clear paths to represent human being, which is a process and not a state, and a verb and not a noun. Cindy's book tracks the many, many narrative strategies that experiment with breaking out of the mold to offer new and transformative ways of humanizing that mobilize relations of care and responsibility that are abolitionist, queer, and decolonial. Cindy's writing is at once fierce and full of care. As I turn the pages, I find myself exclaiming, "This is the analysis I've been waiting for! Yes, this makes so much sense, and thank you for showing me how these analyses are rooted in movement politics." So, thank you, Cindy. In this book, as in her other works, Cindy's place-based political sensibilities inform her discussions of liberation struggles elsewhere. This skillful straddling of these various contexts is, of course, reflected in the subtitle of her book. Cindy has been at the forefront of providing us at the university with an intellectual and political space to think carefully about the connections between Palestinian liberation and Native Hawaiian sovereignty by bringing two decolonial and decolonizing movements in critical conversation. She initiated the Hawaii Coalition for Justice in Palestine in 2013, which morphed as Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine at UH in 2016. With students and community members, she has organized Decolonial November since 2014, and you read about the solidarities and the relationship building that emerged between Palestinian scholar activists and Kiai at Mauna in the beautifully crafted chapter on Mauna, which is the last chapter of the book. Because the SFJP and decolonial, because of SFJP and Decolonial November, we have the opportunity to learn and hear directly from many Palestinian scholars, activists, and artists. And there will be an artist who will be visiting in October. So please come to that event. And their travel to Hawaii has meant navigating many, many bureaucratic hoops, which is a sanitized word, for barriers, as well as local Zionist backlash. Cindy has worked tirelessly with a broad group of US-based scholars to educate professional associations about the basic rights of Palestinian students, artists, and scholars to have the freedom of expression, thought, and movement that we have and take for granted. She has done this to get academic associations to respond to Palestinian civil society calls to boycott, divestment, and sanctions in order to protest the everyday violation that Israel affects on Palestinians. The chapter on Stephen Salaita and the stories about and for his son teaches us why, as academics in North America, we must understand the political import of the academic boycott in challenging and interrupting the support our universities led to the brutalization of Palestinians. Like me, many of you in this room are familiar with Cindy's steadfast refusal to obey the university's settler colonial and neoliberal dictates. She demonstrates how the university can become a site to organize and mobilize. And this is something that I have learned so much about from Cindy. Since the time I have been at the university, I have known Cindy through resistance mounted against the secret military research in the form of UARC, efforts to genetically modify color, the TMT, and most recently the contamination of kakupaki. Lastly, this book joins two of her other books, Writing Women's Community and Academic Lives, and an extraordinary co-edited special issue of the Biography journal that Craig just mentioned, called Life in Occupied Palestine. And Ibrahim Alde, who was a co-editor, is right here in the room. And what is really extraordinary is that the contributions are in English and Arabic. The corpus of Cindy's work exemplifies how to follow new directions in radical intellectual and political commitments through multiple projects and to hear stories that people tell about themselves and their worlds. Cindy's work at the university and in multiple communities required courage, generosity, steadiness, and enormous care. With that, I give the floor over to writer, activist, teacher, mentor, and friend, Cynthia Franklin.
I feel like I should just sit down. Just eat cake. But I did prepare some remarks, and I just want to thank you all for being here. It's very overwhelming and wonderful to see this room of people, and I just so appreciate you all coming for this event. And I want to thank you, Monisha, for that generous and beautiful introduction, and Craig, and everyone here. Many of you in the audience are responsible for everything that is right in the book. Too many to name, although I try in the acknowledgments, which I have been told are rather excessive, but I don't think so. I want to thank Shankar for making this occasion so sweet with that beautiful cake, and also Monisha, Craig, Paige, and Carolyn for all the organizing, and Lee for getting the books here. I'm really happy to be able to celebrate having this book out of my hands. At the same time as this is a joyful occasion for me, I want to acknowledge that I'm presenting during a heavy time. And I hope the book and the conversations it might spark can support in however small a way the efforts that many of you in this room are undertaking to create a decolonial world in the face of floods, fires, earthquakes, and other catastrophic forms of settler and capitalist violence. I'm going to take the next half hour to give you a sense of how and why I came to this book, what its key theoretical terms are, and its general shape. Narrating Humanity, that wasn't this one. That's fine. Narrating Humanity was in the making for over 12 years. The writing happened in zigs and zags. Many interruptions took me away from it that also then brought me back to it. And through attention to life writing texts that have either catalyzed public controversies or intervened in crises over who counts as human, I started this project with questions about how our understandings of the human are shaped by stories, especially those that engage life writing genres. And by life writing, I mean this to include much more than writing. And I just put some possible examples up there on that slide. My interest has been in how consequential life writing is in determining who counts as human, and in determining what counts as civil, and how fundamentally these concepts depend on often deadly structures of dehumanization. What inspired this interest, and at the heart of the book, although a main focus of only one chapter, is Palestine. When I think to the start of this book, I think about a confrontation at a conference. I had just given a paper connecting attacks on Hannah Arendt's alleged incivility and anti-Semitism in Eichmann and Jerusalem to those being issued against contemporary critics of Zionism. I had this rather extraordinary experience of being cut off 10 minutes into my presentation by the chair of the panel and shut down during Q&A, not invited up to participate in it. The next day I tried to give a check to support graduate student travel, and the conference organizer physically backed away from me as if I was posing some physical threat to him, and said that he had heard that my behavior was really scandalous and I gave a very inappropriate talk. He did take the check. A few months later, at another conference, I thought, I'm going to try this out again and see what happens. And on a rainy Seattle street, an old friend of mine afterwards confronted me and called me a self-hating Jew, unprofessional, a really terrible scholar. It was a whole scene. And these responses really enacted the very phenomenon I had been describing in the conference paper, one in which to acknowledge Palestinian humanity was equated to denying Jewish humanity and acting in an uncivil fashion. So I went on to write about this dynamic in an essay entitled Eichmann's Ghosts, part of which appears in the introduction to Narrating Humanity. These conference experiences also got me thinking a lot about just what was happening in Israel and Palestine, and I applied for a 2013 faculty development seminar sponsored by the Palestinian American Research Center. The seminar I went on to attend in Palestine and all that followed from it took me away from before bringing me back to a book on who counts as human. Upon my return from Palestine, I began co-editing with Rahim and Morgan Cooper, a former student, the special issue that Monisha and Craig both mentioned. Working on this special issue involved another few trips to Palestine. At the invitation of Sunaina Myra and Majid Shihadeh, who I met in Ramallah, I also joined the organizing collective of the U.S. campaign for the academic and cultural boycott of Israel. And as part of that organizing, I worked intensively on the boycott resolutions that Monisha mentioned for the next few years for the American Studies Association, and then for a failed MLA boycott resolution that I'm still extremely bitter about. During the copy editing of the special biography issue, Israel mounted another one of its all-out assaults on Palestine that directly impacted contributors. Correspondence with them included their accounts of the Israeli army killing their friends and family members, one lost a brother that way, and also blowing up their homes. Meanwhile, in the U.S., Stephen Salaita, my U.S. ACPI comrade, was fired from a position at the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, allegedly on the basis of tweets denouncing Israel's U.S.-sponsored violence during that long, bloody summer of 2014. That's the point at which I also started Students and Faculty for Justice in Palestine, and working together with amazing folks who are part of Civil Hawaiʻi. One of SFJP's central activities has been to host visitors for the series Monisha was mentioning, Decolonial November. And also, as Monisha has mentioned, one of the main objectives has been through that series to build solidarity from Hawaii to Palestine as two interconnected sites resisting occupation and settlerism. So all of these projects felt a lot more pressing and seemed more contributory to things I cared about than writing a book about formulations of the human. Immersions in this organizing involved community building with companions with shared political commitments. But I was also learning about how movement politics provide new as well as resurgent ways for thinking about human being and becoming. And this involvement returned me to Narrating Humanity. And I want to share some photos of the kind of movement building gatherings and exchanges that led me back to the book and that are included in chapters in Palestine and Mauna Kea in ways that I hope give you a flavor of them. Some of you might find yourself in these photos, and along with many more of you in the audience today. These brought me to the story I most wanted to tell in Narrating Humanity, one of how movements can remake what it means to be human. And so this is during Stephen Salaita's visit. This is at the beach. Kim, you're back there. This is, I think probably some of you were part of this Debka, well, it wasn't Debka dancing, it was to a Debka song. We were just doing the best we could. And also this is on Mauna Kea with Punahele and Rama and Yusuf al-Jamal. In chapters on BLM, these stories have included, for example, seeing how in refusing a long history of anti-Black state violence as part of their activism, BLM organizers are narrating new ways of being human, premised on old and new forms of queer kinship and Black radical abolitionist care. And here they are dancing Debka in Bethlehem to Sweet Honey in the Rocks Ella song. So that's a kind of really beautiful convergence, I think. Or in a chapter on the Palestine Solidarity Movement, I look to how in his memoir on civil rights, Stephen Salaita draws upon U.S. active organizing and principles to write back against well-organized Zionist attacks that in the name of civility deny his and Palestinian humanity. I explore how for a website he starts following his expulsion from academe, he goes on to write beautiful long-form visionary essays about fatherhood and about driving a school bus, in which he draws on abolitionist as well as boycott political movements. In other words, as I returned to the book, it became more than an academic project. It became one that attempts to honor movements and organizers who I saw providing ways to think about human being and becoming in ways that unsettle hegemonic narratives of the human that naturalize and legitimate settler, capitalist, and heteropatriarchal violence. As my work on this project progressed, I also became increasingly aware of the limits of working within the category of the human. This had everything to do with the movement on the part of Kanaka Maoli to protect Mauna Kea from the erection of the TMT. I've been following this movement for years, and with some involvement as an ally since 2015. In 2019, I was nearing completion of the manuscript. UH, the state, and related actors moved to begin construction of the TMT. To have the privilege and the responsibility to participate in the mighty wave of resistance as Kiai put out a kahea for support in saying no to the TMT, and as they established the Pu'uhonua that almost overnight transformed the parking lot at the intersection of the Daniel K. Inouye Highway and Mauna Kea Access Road into a refuge, was truly transformative for me. Through practices of ceremony, art, mutual aid, and education, the vision of Ea and the framework of Aloha Aina that Kanaka Maoli were realizing on the Mauna, the love, the radical care, the respect and profound interrelations with the land and with the elements, all of this led me to rethink the shape of the book. The movement for the Mauna brought home the limits of my focus on the human as a privileged and distinct entity. I wrote what began as an epilogue, and then the editor that I worked with at Fordham, Richard Morrison, said, no, this needs to be a chapter. And I was pretty trepidatious about doing that and spent the next year writing it. The resulting chapter, through stories included in there, I attempt to honor what I learned from Aloha Aina and to contribute in however small a way to the creation of new and resurgent ways of human becoming and belonging premised on forms of radical reciprocity with a living and breathing world. And I want to share a few photos that are in the book that I write about as part of that story. And again, you'll see that many of you and people you know are part of this story in a chapter that I hope lifts up your voices and movement making. There's an art build that was on what Andre Perez calls the 4th of July. And I love this picture of the daughters of people that were just at the part of the leadership of the Mauna. It's such a privilege to have that photo in there. I can say more about these and other photos and the stories that accompany them later if people are interested. But as part of these initial remarks, I also want to comment on the book's cover art. When I commissioned this art from Joy Lehuanani Enomoto, I gave her a draft of the manuscript, and she returned with a piece entitled The Struggle for Ea, featuring an image of a lung with a damaged trachea. I love this image not only because it encapsulates a very human struggle for breath, for sovereignty, for rising, but also for the way that the trachea, bronchus, and bronchiolia, I learned those words after seeing it, appear as rhizomatic tree branches that capture a sense of collective struggle and this book's movement towards connecting humans to land and other living beings. I also value this image because Joy is part of the stories this book tells as an organizer who is involved in and who also brings together movements for Black, Palestinian, and Hawaiian liberation. Over the course of writing about the narratives and movement politics this book engages, I've come up with 3 interrelated theoretical terms: narrative humanity, narrated humanity, and grounded narrative humanity, each of which I explore in different sections of the book. I want to try and explain these terms and the approach. So conceiving this approach came in part from an attempt to respond to Sylvia Wynter's provocation to scholars to go beyond existing genres of the human, or what she calls man 1 and man 2. While Wynter calls upon scholars, particularly in Black studies, to come up with new modes and methods of research to engage in a process of what she calls rehumanization, my interest is in how these new modes and methods can work in tandem with life-writing stories of the kind we see today emerging from decolonial, indigenous, and abolitionist movements. My approach also takes inspiration from Barbara Harlow's theorization of resistance literature. In this, she builds on Ghassan Kanafani's 1966 resistance literature in occupied Palestine to explore how resistance literature both reflects and participates in third world liberation movements. Harlow's attention to how canonical literature perpetuates imperial agendas and how resistance literature can transform our understandings of literature while participating in liberation movements crucially informs my theorizing of narrative and narrated humanity. In coming up with the term narrative humanity, I'm indebted to Samira Esmir's formulation of juridical humanity. In her book by that name, Esmir determines how Egypt, as a technology of colonial control, how in Egypt, as a technology of colonial control, humanity came to be thought of as something that could be confiscated or allocated. And she shows how this happened in the courts through a process in which the law came to be an instrument not just to restore a violated humanity, but in fact to set the terms and conditions that made some violations not only legitimate, but just and humane. So I came up with narrative humanity as a kind of companion term to juridical humanity. And I use this term to describe the range of historically variable but persistently ideological generic and narrative conventions and codes that, coming out of Western colonial contexts, create understandings of the human, and within the human, the inhuman. As normative ways of being human get encoded in narratives, these narratives also exclude and render as illegible, inhuman, or less than human anyone that does not conform to them. In this way, what I am calling narrative humanity can and most often does uphold norms that justify violent forms of repression, extraction, and exclusion as it works in tandem with juridical humanity. And just as humans appealing for human recognition in the courts must work within the very system of law that has designated them as inhuman, it's such a terrible process, even if it's a necessary one. So too, those countering dehumanization often must lay claim to the very narratives that in their time and place have come to constitute hallmarks of the human. However, unlike juridical humanity, narrative humanity, or things that happen in narratives, can defy, if not in wholesale ways, already existing genres and conventions there's a more suppleness because narrative humanity is the stuff of ideology, but also imagination. It enables those without state power to transgress, if not fully escape established parameters and cultural institutions, to define the human more capaciously. In other words, narrative humanity bespeaks a set of conventions that can be used towards repressive but also counter-hegemonic, if not revolutionary purposes. So in part one of this study, I look at life writing texts that mobilize forms of narrative humanity to challenge the dehumanization on which state violence depends. And I look at narratives of family, citizenship, career, coming of age, religion, and how these play a role to maintain interlocking systems of heteropatriarchy, racial capitalism, and settlerism. And then through a reading of Dave Eggers' Hurricane Katrina narrative, Zaytoon, I look at how he uses textbook forms of narrative humanity, in particular the marriage plot, the narrative of conquest and discovery, and the self-made man narrative, and to try and challenge the dehumanization of his hero, but how he actually reproduces liberal or invisible forms of oppression, because he stays so closely to the generic forms and conventions that he's relying on. But I'm also interested in how more unruly things can happen. And that, so I give a reading at the end of that chapter on Trouble the Water, and then in the following chapter, through analyses of Ryan Coogler's docudrama Fruitvale Station and Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, to look at how engaging critically with forms of narrative humanity does provide a way to revise and expand parameters of the human in ways that can be important. In part two, I look at how what I'm calling narrated humanity can be a lens through which to study how narratives can participate in struggles to conceive human being beyond juridical and narrative humanity. And I don't think she's here, but Kathy Ferguson really helped me think about this at a women's studies colloquium a few years ago. By narrated humanity, I mean narrative forms and genres that have not yet been codified in literature, that are coming out of political movements that are still unfolding, that are still in the making. Whereas narrative humanity describes forms with entrenched literary structures, acts of narrated humanity break with those and ideologies of the human that they support. And as narrative still in the making, and here there's that shift from narrative as a noun to narrated as a verb, narrated humanity offers formulations of the human that are not yet established, although over time they may well be. At issue then is not a distinction between a bad narrative humanity and a good narrated humanity, but rather different narrative modalities, those that are convention-bound, narrative humanity, and those that are still in formation, narrated humanity. The acts of narrated humanity explored in parts 2 and 3 come out of a specific set of conditions that have given rise to contemporary liberatory political movements that are deliberately intersectional and committed to building community and solidarity. These movements cross-fertilize and often interconnect. As they do so, they break with established narratives founded on capitalist and colonial extraction and disposability, criminalization, and incarceration, as they bring into being new and urgently needed understandings of the human that are international, decolonial, abolitionist, queer, and founded on a respect for and kinship with the more than human, including water, trees, and mountains. This profoundly difficult political and epistemological work, reliant as it is on stories, necessitates the creation of new genres, narrative conventions, and forms. Acts of narrated humanity that bring into being new aesthetic forms and narratives, therefore, I'm arguing, are not ancillary to movements, but they're part of them. They shape and are shaped. Narrative humanity shapes and gives shape to political movements. So the texts I take up explore the specific possibilities that are offered by the Black Lives Matter movement, in a chapter on Patrisse Cullors and Asha Bondalay's When They Call You a Terrorist, the Black Lives Matter movement, memoir, and the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement in a chapter on Stephen Salaika. Then in in part 3, I engage with stories coming out of and sustaining the movement to protect Mauna Kea. With their attention to solidarity and intersectionality, these movements depend on and inspire decolonial and abolitionist stories about human being and becoming. As they create forms of queer kinship, non-status belonging, and community, these stories depart from dominant modes of narrative humanity that naturalize and sustain articulated forms of institutional violence. In the third part, I introduce the term grounded narrative humanity to accompany the exploration of narrated humanity. And this term is inspired by Yellowknife Dene scholar Glenn Sean Coulthard. I conceived this term to describe a system of narrative humanity that emerges from an understanding of the human that is normative within indigenous worldviews, or what Coulthard calls grounded normativity. And that's his name for indigenous practices and knowledge that structure indigenous people's ethical engagements with the world and their relationship with other humans and non-human others. In naming this way of being grounded normativity, I really like the way that Coulthard unsettles settler norms and lays collective claim to a world that is decolonial, not just anti-colonial, one with norms that predate rather than derive from or talk back to the settler state. Stories based in grounded narrative humanity sustain Coulthard's grounded normativity as they posit humans in profound, long-lasting relationship to land and other than humans. Grounded narrative humanity posits as normative a distinctly anti-capitalist and decolonial understanding of the human as part of an age-old story that is still in the making, one in which humans and more than humans exist in reciprocal, caring, and non-hierarchical kinship. As stories based in grounded normativity posit humans in time immemorial relationships to land and more than humans, they also show that being human is part of an ongoing creation story. As such, they often are also acts of narrated humanity, ones that at times work beyond but not against grounded narrative humanity's understandings of the human to realize a decolonial future. So in part 3, I explore grounded narrative humanity through engagement with the movement for Mauna Kea. Whereas the first 2 parts of the book focus on stories that have been figure very largely in public controversies and crises, in this chapter I make a move into life writing myself as I consider the significance of small acts of grounded narrative and narrated humanity. In telling stories that emerge from my own experiences, I attempt to fulfill my kuleana as a scholar and to extend my participation as a settler ally in the movement for Mauna Kea. So this involves striving to foreground and in however a small way, emulate as well as honor all I've learned from Aloha Aina, many of whom are students, whose work in the world refuses boundaries between storytelling, theorizing, pedagogy, and activism. Again, many of you are in the room. The book concludes with a postscript, Hope, Joy, and the Struggle for Ea. There I put Joy's cover art in conversation with a song of Hawaiian-Palestinian solidarity written and performed by Kauwila, Mahi, and Ihilani, Lasconia. I have been lucky enough to get to know Kauwila and Ihi not only as students, but also through their Aloha Aina activism, music, scholarship, and art as teachers. And here is a picture of them that's in the book performing this song at an SFJP event featuring Sumaya Howard. They also did this when Sarah Imud was here last year. As I consider this book's through lines in the postscript, I attempt to lift up in ways that in the face of crushing violence, humans continue to rise together and breathe into being old and new forms of human and more than human belonging and becoming. As I put this in the book's closing sentence, it is my sincerest hope that in the long arc of the struggle for Ea, through daily practices of organizing, dreaming, and sharing our stories, we narrate into being more stories that will continue, that will continue to create as yet undetermined ways of human being and joyful belonging that will be breath-giving and, like the struggle for Ea, rooted in land and life and breathtakingly beautiful. I hope this gives you some sense of the book, and I'm now really honored to close this presentation with Kauwila and Ihi's performance of the song that I talk about in that postscript. It is fitting that I do so because it is exactly the kind of storytelling that has inspired Narrated Humanity. So I want to thank you all for listening to this overview, and to Ihi and Kauwila for being willing to share their music and bring this book's intended spirit to life for us today.
Hi everybody.
Hi.
I'm Ihi. Yeah, we're gonna do a little song. So cool that we never performed in a classroom before. So a little sick. But before we started, I think both of us just wanted to take the time to know how we knew Cindy. I've been lucky enough to know Cindy pretty much since I got to UH, so like fresh age of 17, 18, and I wouldn't be who I am without you, and it's because of the love that I see for our people and young people and the folks in Palestine that I'm able to dream of the occupied Hawaii, one that's not so unencumbered or like surrounded by state-centric violence, but one that's been harmful and resistant. So it's because of you and all the amazing people in this realm who have helped to shape who we are. Sorry. Yeah, it's truly an honor to be here, and this song wouldn't have been created if not for the work that you've done to guide so many Hawaiians into understanding and thinking about how our liberation is so heavily connected to the liberation of Palestine. Yeah, pass it up. We would love to share some of this one out.
I should never follow you. But I just want to echo the same gratitude and thanks to you, Cindy, for all the amazing work that you put in and guiding our along the way in many ways. And I'm so joyful that I got to be a homeowner of yours and make that claim in public. And really learn so much about what movement building and narrating humanity can look like in our movements we're talking to, and how that can sustain us and as we continue our movements forever.
All right. So the song, there's a hook, and it goes, "Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine." Can we say it? Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. So it's a complete decolonization of our minds and bodies that's going to bring forth this liberation. It's not the UN or state policy that's going to grant us this freedom, but it's the people rising up. So yeah, feel free to chime in if you can. I think we're just going to do it acoustically, no mic, so we'll let it rip. And yeah, if you want to put your hands up, it's cool. This is one of the earliest shows we've ever done. There's still daylight out. Okay, roll the track. Okay. Can you hear us if we talk like this? Okay, cool.
Taken down when we organize our masses. Colonialist classics belong in caskets. Doing Hawaii BDS. If you getting serious, it ain't TDS. They're trying to wipe our nations off the GPS. They still got money for war, and they still not feeding the poor. So we rise up and fight like the land till we bleed from our pores. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine.
We know that anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism, and an alleviate no state is not Hawaiian nationalism. The UN won't save us, so grants us these freedoms. So just another weapon of the seven-headed demon. We may be pinned down by 50 UN stars. Liberation's the cost for those near and those far. We choose to join hands when they they only bear arms. So hands off Makua, hands off Sheikh Jarrah. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine.
From the olive tree to the smallest loti, they bulldoze the homes of Ihilani, Waimanalo, Makua, Gaza, trying to turn our homelands into a plaza. The shores of this concrete jungle's tied into your ancestral rubble. Ku'e, 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 a ho'oko, ika banana. The story of the future's liberation. We the authors. Free your people, free your mind.
Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. So raise your fist high if you want to see through this vision. Up with the people and down with the system. Ihiwana o Luna, Ihiwana o La. It's to our kupuna, comrades of Samoa. From olive tree to olive tree, from Niihau to Hawaiʻi. We see you when you struggle and we won't stop till we all are free. Ku'ana kapaya. Intifada, intifada, intifada. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. Free your people, free your mind. Deoccupy Hawaii and Palestine. When I say land, you say back. Land, back. Land, back. Land, back. Land, back. Land, back. When I say vai, you say back. Ready? Vai, back. Vai, back. Vai, back. Vai, back. Vai, back. When I say everything, you say back. Let me hear everything back. Everything back. Everything back. Everything back. Yeah.